Welcome back to Talking Marvel. Today we're going to dive into why the Guardians of the Galaxy is the MCU's best trilogy. I know some of you might disagree with me, so stick around to hear me out here. There are 6 heroes that have had trilogies in the MCU, the Guardians included, so I think it would be best to compare the Guardians 3 movies to each of the others, starting with Iron Man, the first completed trilogy. Iron Man kicked off the MCU, had 2 movies in Phase 1, and the trilogy concluded with the start of Phase 2 10 years ago. While the Guardians hadn't even had their first movie yet, it's more than just a recency bias. The Iron Mans arguably got worse over the 3, as the first one is highly regarded. The first Iron Man had a great story, but lacked a villain worth talking about. Same goes for the second and third movies, as Aldrich Killian was arguably one of the least exciting villains in the MCU to date. The Guardians went up against a Kree with a Power Stone and his army, a Celestial, Ravagers, the Sovereign, and in the finale, the High Evolutionary. I would argue that the main villain in each of the Guardians movies was more impressive and powerful than all 3 of the Iron Man villains combined. While the villains go fully in favor of the Guardians movies don't progressively get worse like Iron Man's. All 3 of the movies are great, topped off with what I would consider one of the best movies in the MCU, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Iron Man is more of a lone ranger, and even though he is very good at conversing with other characters in an entertaining way, he doesn't get a lot of chances to do so in his solo movies like the Guardians do in every single scene. There are a lot more hold your breath and see who might die in Guardians than there is in Iron Man, making it a more gripping experience throughout. The next trilogy the MCU completed was Captain America with Civil War. Although The Winter Soldier is seen as one of the best MCU movies with the story, excitement, and characters, that and Civil War, which is also a great movie, can't bring the first Avenger up enough to have it top Guardians. None of the Guardians movies weren't exciting and filled with a ton of action. Origin stories are sometimes hard to pull off, and the first Avenger fell into that category for the MCU. It featured a scrawny Captain America for part of the movie, was based well before the Avengers were formed, had 1 hero and 1 villain. Red Skull isn't the worst villain the MCU has depicted in a movie, but the lack of technology for the time of the 1940s made the movie seem a bit lackluster, especially considering Cap didn't even defeat Red Skull. He did that to himself. The comparison here is the weight of 3 Guardians movies to just 2 Captain America movies. All 3 in the trilogy need to be great pieces of work to be considered the best trilogy over the Guardians. After that, we have Thor, who actually has 4 movies, but since we're discussing trilogies, the 4th and mediocre at best, Love and Thunder, won't be included. This works in favor of the Thor trilogy, but like Captain America, there's an obvious film taking Thor out of the race. I have 0 complaints about Ragnarok, as it was exciting, had multiple villains and storylines to follow, and a small group of heroes working together. It was the first 2 that weren't the best. The first is regarded by many as better than The Dark World, which many would put at the depths of the MCU movies, but seeing as Ragnarok is the only competitor to all the Guardians movies, there's no way Thor beats out the Guardians. Don't get me wrong, Thor's character has been great throughout, it's just the other elements that have brought his movies down. Spider-Man's trilogy comes close, and I will compare them movie by movie in this case. When it comes to the first one of each, I think Homecoming is the weakest of the 3 Spider-Mans. Vulture is a mediocre villain, and the stakes aren't too high compared to Xandar's existence remaining intact and an Infinity Stone being involved in the first Guardians movie. The whole story of coming together for them was part of why the first movie was so well made. 5 different races working as one was great from start to finish. Far From Home was a step up from Homecoming because it brought in some of the characters, and MJ and Peter came together more. The MCU depicted Mysterio exactly how he should be, except he was less direct than he was in the comics, getting on the hero's good sides. It was a similar play out in Guardians 2 with Ego, and though I believe that Guardians Volume 2 is the weakest of the 3, it is still as good or better than Far From Home overall. The third movies of the Guardians and Spider-Man is where they really went all out. No Way Home brought in the past 2 Spider-Mans and most of the villains, nearly forming a version of the Sinister Six. It really boosted this movie, bringing in the nostalgia from the past and also including Doctor Strange and the multiverse, with a big sacrifice. Guardians 3 didn't disappoint one bit, as they had all the Guardians brought in over their multiple appearances in the MCU to that point, and Adam Warlock. The High Evolutionary was arguably one of the best villains the MCU has chosen and executed on the big screen, and tied the movies together very nicely. As a whole, I would say Spider-Man comes the closest, though it may very well be some people's favorite. Ant-Man is the final trilogy that is completed to this point, and the third one kicked off Phase 5 with Kang, one of the most highly regarded villains, as the main enemy. Ant-Man is similar to Guardians in that they're the goofier characters in the MCU, but that's what they have been from the start, and what makes them good and unique. While Guardians had the right amount of jokes and actually a lot of serious parts in the movie, the negativity towards Quantumania was MODOK and a bit more forceful and cringe parts. Cassie wasn't the best addition, especially when they pushed her to a big role so hard. It was cool to experience the quantum realm in full, or the most we're going to see in the MCU, in Quantumania, but the Guardians got to visit very interesting new places as well as they normally do. The stories were well written for the first two Ant-Mans, and they were better than many might have expected. But in terms of villains, Kang is miles ahead of Yellowjacket and Ghost, which brought the first two Ant-Man movies down below the Guardians movies. I'm interested to hear what your favorite trilogy in the MCU is and why. And if you enjoyed this video, like and sub for more.